This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode number 137. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
I don't know if you were watching on Sunday, but I've been following this for a while. They had on 60 Minutes a little expose on the Havana Syndrome. Now, this is not a new thing. And of course, every few years, there's more attention paid to it, but it's bizarre because a lot of the symptoms, actually it goes back to even maybe the Cold War, people describe similar symptoms. Starts with a low hum, intense pressure in the skull, a pulse of pain, sometimes in the middle of the night, loud pulsations. And what about that guy that said his family had been attacked a few times by this pulsation.
Yep.
And he went into the bedroom of his children and they were actually twitching.
Yes. And he put his head next to theirs. There was a hum. So it was directed right at their heads.
Absolutely horrifying. Now, quote unquote, the Havana Syndrome, of course, first emerged in Cuba in 2016. And a lot of the first cases were CIA officers. So nothing was really made too much about it.
What blew my mind, though, is since the whole Havana thing, there's over 1,000 of these things documented, 1,000. And so it's fucking happening. And they go ahead. They penetrated the White House. It's really
look. Okay. So James Lynn, a professor at the University of Illinois, he was reading about these reports, from the Havana Syndrome. And he immediately, as I've suspected all along too, that it's microwaves. And his belief was based not on just theoretical research, but firsthand experience, because decades earlier he had heard the sounds himself. Now, so since the emergence around World War II, there have been reports of people being able to hear something when a nearby radar was switched on and began sending microwaves into the sky. And originally it was called in 1961 the Frey, Frey effect, because that was the first doctor who wrote an article about it then. So again, the theory is that I believe, at least, is that the energy from microwaves can be absorbed by the soft brain tissue and then converted to a pressure wave moving inside the head, which is interpreted by the brain as sound. And this occurs when high power microwaves were delivered as pulses rather than in the low power continuous form we get from microwaves, which, by the way, I never use a microwave, never had one.
Well, the category of the weapon, it's like, what is it called? It's not the USW. In other words, it can be microwaves, it can be sound waves. It's a type of weapon that you basically manipulate waves within our atmosphere, and they've been developed for a while. I know they arm a lot of like cruise ship captains when they do, say, an exotic cruise, say from Egypt down to South Africa. But when you go by Somalia every now and then, you'll have these pirates, modern day pirates, and they're like Boston whaler, and they try to hijack the place, and these captains will aim like one of these kind of sonic weapons at them, and they start shitting themselves, and they turn around. I mean, it can fuck you up. These microwave ones, I mean, I think they basically they've done MRIs. It looks like it's like similar to concussions and stuff like that.
So anyway, Professor Lin, he was in Pushino, Russia, and there was this 10-story U.S. embassy. And this was when it was actually called the Moscow signal. And it was bathed in this wide invisible beam of low-level microwaves. That's when it became known as the Moscow signal. And for many years, most of the people working there didn't know, of course, anything about it. And it came from an antenna on the balcony of a nearby Soviet apartment that hit the upper floors of the embassy, where the ambassador's office and more sensitive work was carried out. And at first, of course, nothing's being said. And then a new ambassador in 1974 arrives to this, 10-story building, Walter Stossel, and he was threatening to resign unless they made known, because this is like causing panic. And he even called Henry Kissinger at one point, and it was Kissinger who also said probably linked to microwaves. And we're trying to keep this thing quiet. Anyway, I mean, this is just... there's a lot of things here, and it's also not a coincidence this was shown on 60 Minutes last week, because there is a giant propaganda movement going on to justify a war we're about to get in with Russia, and basically the subtext of this was that Russia was doing it, which is possible. And I'm not saying Russians are innocent, but I'm saying we're not either. And excuse me, HAARP, Alaska. Look it up. Of course, we're not innocent. We never are.
What's also interesting about a lot of technology including like say helicopters. I think helicopters were developed in the Korean War. So these things always trickle down into just general society. So one of the guys who, one of these big weapons developers who invented something to do with these USWs, ultimately his dream is to have them used in marketing and stuff. So as you're walking down the street, your phone's being scanned about all your consumption patterns. And then like a schizophrenic, no one else hears it because the sound is targeted at your head. And it's like, well, they're selling Coca-Cola at the store around the corner right now, half off. So this is all this kind of stuff is going to come. If it's not going to be attacking you physically, it's going to be attacking you mentally in terms of just society on the society level. Whether
look, you can't. First of all, you can't discount the possibility of any kind of evil maneuvers based on sound, microwaves, electricity, pollution, and every other way that they are trying to control or kill us, even if it's just simple algorithms. It's all something one has to be very aware of. That's it. I mean,
I'm going to go back to another story, which we've talked about several times. The hippos in Colombia.
Again.
Well, it's about
now?
It's about to be officially announced by the Colombian government. They're going to categorize them as an invasive species because it just started with just a couple of hippos for Escobar. And by the way, how the fuck did he have those
Where'd that come from?
I mean, really just a
cargo.
Fucking hippo. I mean, that's just seems like a
maybe maybe they were babies when they were brought over. Who knows?
It could have been. But if they were babies, I don't know if they were incestuous. It's going to hit about 400 of them. It's just started with a couple. And it's kind of mixed because there are some locals are like, wow, this is kind of an interesting twist to our the suburbs of Medellin.
They crush everything though.
Well, and some people like them and some people like, well, they're very aggressive. So, but the government's going to have to, they're either going to try to start castrating them or killing some of them.
Now that Colombia just passed, more lenient abortion laws. Thank you very much. I mean, maybe they'll start, vasectomies for all my hippo friends.
Invasive species, especially when they're successful,
especially when they weigh like 1,000 pounds.
Well, they're thriving. Yeah. I mean, usually it's like kudzu or something, but like now you got these cannonball mammals. Are they mammals? I guess I don't know.
They're terrifying. Anyway, give us something. Give us a slap happy tale here.
Well, this is somewhat happy. Scott Thompson from Ventura, California, fisherman. He's been doing this his whole life, and he claims he thought this a million times. If I ever fell off this fucking boat while it was in gear, I would be fucked. Well, sure enough, it happened. He falls off, and then before he can even, stick his head above the surface for air, his boat is already fucking 100 yards away. And he's like, I fucking can't believe this is how I'm gonna fucking die. And the sun starts setting. And by the way, it's winter right now. It's not exact, when the sun sets in LA in the winter,
it's chilly.
It was like 50 fucking degrees. And the water is probably about, who knows? Anyhow, from a distance, he sees this light. He goes, that's an oil rig. It's about 2.5 miles. I'm going to go for it. And with a hypothermia.
Better than hypothermia.
Oh, there you go. Yes, exactly.
This is the guy that swam for like 5 hours, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And he swam on his back because he had to float. He knew he had a chance when a harbor seal started like coming up to him going, wah, wah. He's lucky that fucking great white didn't take him out. But anyhow, he finally made it. And you had a story, when people, it's not when people decide I'm going to live, it's when people decide I'm going to die. And that leads to this because I used to live in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and one of the local heroes was Howard Blackburn from like the late 1800s. He was a legendary fisherman, and he's from, I think, Canada originally, but he became a local hero. And he was on a dory. I don't know if people know how that works, where there's like these boats. There'll be two of them. They spread the net like in some kind of circle, and then they scoop up all the fish. The old school way of doing it. Well, they hit some kind of fog storm. The line gets detached. He and this guy in this dory are like, how the hell, there's something like hundreds of miles off the fucking coast. and then a winter storm comes.
Oh yeah, this is the perfect storm story, right?
Yeah, it's within. It's a legend of the perfect storm, exactly. And he and his partner, like Howard's, like, we're gonna make it. His hands are so frozen, they're not even, his fingers aren't even working. He basically straps his fingers and hands, like ties knots around the oars, because his fingers are about to fucking break off like broken statue pieces. And he starts going, and two and a half days in, his partner guy was like, we're not making it, I'm gonna die. And so he just laid down and died, where Howard Blackburn's like,
I'm gonna make it.
And he, for 5 close to 6 days, rode with no food, nothing, and fucking made it. Now, of course, they had to amputate all of his fucking fingers and toes. I mean, they're done. They're done.
All right, now, Tim, between forensics and true crime, occasionally need a little light relief. So, and I of course, I love things like The Deadliest Catch, Ice Truckers, anything that men put their life in jeopardy, doing a job I would never in my life do. And I've recently, I'm often late to these things because I rarely diversify from my, viewing of choice. But I stumbled upon this show called Alone. And it was, I think it starts with 10 people, whoever can last 100 days in the Alaskan Arctic or Vancouver Islands, whoever can last 100 days on their own, right?
What month?
From September till December, will win $1 million. And I'm just like, I would never be doing that. But what was interesting is out of 10 people, 2 women were 2 of the 3 finalists. I was quite impressed with them. They were very good at, trapping bunnies to eat.
Oh, Kodiak Island, you said?
No, it was in the Vancouver Islands or up, Alaska.
So,
there's a few different series.
British Columbia.
Few different series. I just hooked into one, but 100 days in the wilderness by yourself. Good luck. Build a shelter. One guy burnt his shelter down. But I love any show that shows me the stubbornness of men, whether or not they live, overcoming the odds, which I will never put myself in the position to face. I have to say, I kind of get off on it.
Those hermits and the people that live way up, in Canada, they call it way up in the bush, as they call it.
Well, these people are from all over the place.
Well, they're from all over. I
still survivalists.
I did a trip, an exotic trip with my dad and my brothers. I don't know, late 90s, where we had to like fly to Minneapolis to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Another bear story too.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, I don't have to say that, but to Uranium City, and then from Uranium City to the seaplane. Anyways, you're far, million miles away, no roads, any of this shit. There's this little, but there'd be people that lived up there, and basically, and there'd be no one for thousands, like a million miles, and you basically spend 8 months prepare. You spend like 4 months, 5 months preparing for, like, so you don't die in the other 7-8 months.
Brutal.
It seems like pretty insane. There's a story here, and you were always good with this on the road.
Do tell.
But, when you're in the van and stuff, and there's leftovers, when we stop for gas, you throw that shit out. Because
the biggest lesson I try to impose upon everybody is really rice has a high bacterial count, and when people eat Chinese food and they get sick, it's usually because the rice has been left out too long. I know the story you're going to tell. Tell.
So this 19-year-old visits his buddy in Boston who's in college. They didn't mention his name or what college, but it's one of those colleges. There's a lot of them there. And they must have been like stoned or something, because he's like, I got the munchies, man. Goes in his refrigerator, is like, oh, there's some leftovers. Starts wolfing the shit down.
And they were in the refrigerator, but who knows when they ended up there.
Who knows how long. Anyhow, this guy is within no time. It's like, I don't feel good. And his vital organs start shutting down, kidneys, lungs, and his heart. He's in the emergency room. Some skin rash, some bacteria. It's like almost like a gangrene kind of thing. I don't know what it was.
Saw the pictures. Terrifying.
Well, they had to amputate both his legs from the knee down. They amputated, I think, his fingers. But it's one of these things. And, my brother, who has to go to like Africa and always exotic places a lot with his work, it's funny that like the CDC and State Department say, and we have these hunches when we go into our inner animal. They always say, obviously they don't drink the water here. There's real precautions to take, but they always say at the end of the day, trust your intuition. if something just like, if you get it, tap into your inner animal. If you feel like something's a little weird
exactly.
here.
And you know what? It brings me back to the show Alone, because one of the women that were left, one of the three final survivors, had caught a porcupine. And when she opened it, and the thing is, when you're in that kind of circumstance, you got to find something with as much fat as possible. They're eating a lot of fish. They're not eating enough calories. But she opened the porcupine and she saw that its liver was spotted. And she's like, I don't think so. And she was even horrified that she had touched it. And she's like, of course they have, like, if they need a medic is going to come. But she's like, you know what? I need fat. I need calories. I'm not going to eat that damn porcupine. And it was a good thing she didn't. Now, on to something this brought a smile to my face. I don't know if you saw this. A non-binary drag queen who poses online with people in bondage gear and dressed up as a nun and is claimed to have been given a job in Joe Biden's Department of Energy. Sam Brinton, who uses, of course, the pronouns they, them, and whatever, wrote last month on LinkedIn that they have accepted the job of Deputy Assistant Secretary of Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition. Quote, in this role, I'll be doing what I always dreamed of doing, leading the effort to solve the nation's nuclear waste challenges. Now, okay, deputy assistant secretaries at cabinet agencies, they're low-level positions. They don't require a Senate confirmation. But Mr. Brinton, Miss Brinton, they, them, it, dressed in an American flag, shoes that had an American flag, and a sparkly dress as they stood over three people role-playing as dogs. And the image, of course, gained a lot of attention and anti-LGBTQ criticism. Now, Brinton, who has a master's degree from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he writes that, look, he's working towards solving the world's nuclear waste challenges and protecting everybody, especially LGBTQ, from conversion therapy. So part of what he does is he is the director of a global political strategy at Deep Isolation, a nuclear waste disposal company. And also, I mean, Brinton is just unapologetic about, also hello with the rights already for people who are not like you. But he also promotes his own history of sexual fetishes and kinks related to animal role-playing. But anyway, Brendan gave a talk on kink exploration at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in 2017. And he talked about his own experiences, their own, with pup play, domination, and how to safely choke one's partner. She, they, them also said, well, sometimes they like to tie up their partner on a table and eat dinner on them while they watch Star Trek. Now,
oh, God.
Look, you know what? I'd rather have a total out, whatever, who likes to role play than have these hypocritical sex deviants who occupy half of Congress right now. I'm all for it. I say they, them, it. Brinton, go for it. Let's go. And by the way, who else wants to deal with nuclear waste removal? I think there's a lot of nuclear waste that needs to be removed from Congress right about now. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, sir. Yes, there is.
Yes, them is.
Yeah.
All right. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and episode 137 with Chavisa Woods. This is Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl with the Lydia and Spin and our special guest, Chavisa Woods. Now, what's interesting is my last books are Real It Hurts. You've had three of, I think, your last four books published by Seven Stories. And I had read, under the auspice of Joseph Keckler, who introduced us 100 times, A Memoir of Sexism. I can't wait to read Things to Do When You're Goth in the Country, the Albino album, and Love Does Not Make Me Gentle or Kind, doesn't make any of us. But one of your, let me just say that Chavisa Woods, author, essayist, novelist, teaches workshops, has won many awards for her writing, including the Shirley Jackson Award, the Kathy Acker Award, 3-time Lambda Literary Award, now the executive director of Tribes. We'll go into that in a minute, but I really loved your article, and I don't know if this was just a separate solo piece, on I want to get the title right. It's Hating Valerie Solanas and Loving Violent Men. Oh, thank you very much. Let me just break down what that is and we can discuss a little further. It's easy for men, especially literary. And it's funny because you mentioned Burroughs in that, a few other people, like people want to consider Valerie Solanas, I mean, Scum Manifesto, as you say, a great literary accomplishment, as just a wacko, batshit crazy, hysteric, who shot Andy Warhol, who did live through it. When, for instance, William Burroughs can kill his wife and oh, no biggie. And by the way, someone once asked me, well, what do you feel about William Burroughs' misogyny? I'm like, he's an understudy. I hate them all. Tell us a little bit about that article specifically, because I think it's so important and it plays into, some of your other work, especially, and I want to really talk about too, the 100 Times a Memoir of Sexism, which basically you list as many times as you can remember, from the pettiest to just bullshit times where you've been insulted or assaulted.
Yeah, that article, which appeared in Full Stop a few years ago, I think it's been read by more than 20,000 people now, probably my most read piece. It was somewhat controversial because, of course, people say, oh, are you defending Valerie Solanas shooting Andy Warhol as soon as they read the title? And I had a lot of those comments on social media and also comments on the page. I saw that was kind of a knee-jerk reaction. But the whole point of the article is to point out unconscious bias. It's really to illustrate and just like lay open the unconscious bias that we have when it comes to violence that women commit against men, in this case specifically, and violence that men commit against women. And I think when I laid everything out, that was one big aspect of the article, was showing Pablo Neruda like openly wrote about raping a servant when he was in India as a diplomat. He raped a member of the lowest caste, a woman who was actually dumping out his latrine, who had absolutely no way to say yes or no, and wrote about it quite openly in his memoir, I Confess That I Have Lived. We have Charles Bukowski, who regularly beat women. We have, as she said earlier, William Burroughs, who shot and killed his wife and then wrote about it later, saying maybe that he subconsciously wanted to kill her because he was gay and he didn't want to be married and wasn't out. And then I think the most glaring instance is Norman Mailer, who not only wrote many sexist, ridiculous rants about female, like no writer who doesn't have balls can really be a writer, and about masculinity needing to manifest itself through violence and dominance over women. So he wrote texts that were every bit as incendiary as Scum Manifesto and against women, but he wasn't doing it as satire. He was actually just straight up being the oppressor. And he also attempted to kill his wife and almost did kill her, put her in the ICU for weeks by stabbing her in the chest, and went on television the next day and talked about how he had to do that to assert his dominance in the relationship again, to reassert his dominance. And he went on after that to win many like very prestigious prizes in literature, to continue to be published, to continue to teach, to continue to be awarded and respected. And so I kind of see him as a mirroring Valerie Solanas, although the Scum Manifesto was a satirical piece. So that is the other part of the essay.
This is what's beautiful about your essay. I really loved when you were comparing it as a satire against that completely wrong most of the time, sexist idiot himself, Freud. I loved that. And it just makes me also wonder, are we writing a conjoined novel called, Oh, I Must Confess, I Might Just Fucking Kill You?
Yeah. So I think it was known at the time, especially among intellectuals and writers and artists, that she was satirizing Freud. I think that history has been lost, especially. So now I'm seeing a lot of like younger leftists and queers say she probably would have been a TERF if she were alive today, and giving the text a very literal reading that is very gender essentialist. But the whole idea of pussy envy was literally directly satirizing Freud's very popular theory at the time that all women had penis envy. And if you're not really aware of that, and if you're young and you're not taught that history, Scum Manifesto isn't going to make any sense to you, or it's going to seem like a transphobic text. So that's also one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about what she was doing and situate it in its own time and place as a subversive text at the time, because it really was.
Well, and also situating it against Warhol, who, in my opinion, was a grand user, was dismissive to her because she probably wasn't hot enough to be on one of his screen tests. She was a pesterer because she really felt she was going to get this published by him, by her plays, actually, by him.
She was also mentally ill too, right? I mean, she suffered from a lot of depression.
So a woman who's mentally ill and shoots somebody who doesn't die is worse than a man who claims he's morally and mentally
definitely not
stable,
saying that.
but kills.
I'm definitely not saying that, but I'm actually kind of curious. Because like one of my heroes, for instance, is James Brown. I think he tried to kill his wife twice or something like that. Do you have any heroes that are basically have massive moral flaws and ethical flaws?
Sure. I mean, Valerie Solanas is one of my heroes, but I do not think that she was justified in shooting Andy Warhol. Let me be very clear.
Sure.
I also love Andy Warhol and his work, and I do think he used people, and he also had his flaws. But as like a young queer who's coming from like a rural area in the Midwest, like his legacy made it to where I was and like gave me hope for like a factory-esque type community that I eventually did find in A Gathering of the Tribes, which was hopefully less like extractive than like the way that he used his artist was. He had his flaws. My essay never once justified her shooting Andy Warhol.
No, of course not. Of course not.
It was simply saying that we treat men who do the same thing in their art very differently than we treat women.
Not just in art. I mean, the propaganda machine to even start wars. And what's I find always strange, because it's usually the men that design them and fight them. There are always a whole group of female cheerleaders. I don't know what that's about.
Well, let's just talk about this for 1 second. How about that Kyle Rittenhauser is now going to try to sue anybody that called him a murderer, although he did murder a few people.
For defamation?
Oh, yeah, please.
Oh, my God. Yeah. I mean, that thing was fucked from the beginning. The judge wasn't allowed. They weren't allowed to call the protesters. They had to call them rioters or something. I mean, it was really insane. But
every day, this country, it doesn't shock me. It confirms the fact that we are in the toilet and we are the cesspool of history, and it's just continuing. And from that, we must, as we do as artists, rise above and talk about.
Isn't it violence in general is the problem? And I guess men are kind of, I don't know who's behind that, but I guess men are like, hey, that's our job, not yours. When they're when it's like romanticized and sensationalized. Yeah. I mean, the root to it is like, what's up with the fucking violence to begin with? And why is that even celebrated?
Chavisa, what are you working on now? I hear, pray tell, that you might have a few things boiling in your cauldrons.
I do. I have a collection of literary horror short fiction titled Dead Man's Party that is almost completed. And I'm also almost done with a novel titled Cascade that's about a young man who starts off in poverty and ends up in poverty. It's kind of the anti-hero journey. And it's about rural poverty, which much of my work is about. And then I'm also working on I've been working on this for like 10 years, potentially a memoir entitled Joseph, Keckler, who's an artist and mutual friend of ours, and somewhat collaborator with both of us, I think, loves the title. It's titled How to Prepare Children. And it's about growing up in conservative America. And it also sounds like I might be boiling them in a pot.
and that's where you grew up, right? Did you grow up in rural America?
Yeah, I grew up in a town of 1,000 people, a small farm town about an hour and a half southeast of St. Louis in southern Illinois.
Good barbecue around there, I bet. No, but yeah, that's a part of the country.
So to give you an example of where I'm from, when I went home to visit, I guess I was like 27. I still have a mohawk. I often have a mohawk, but at that time I had a big permed mohawk, and it was summer. So I was wearing I dressed even crazier than I do now. I was wearing like this vest made of seashells, and I had all this jewelry on and bracelets and crazy, my punk goth makeup. And I was driving my grandparents' car, which at the time was, I think, a Cadillac, like a big white Cadillac. Because I'm there visiting my grandparents. I was, lived with my grandparents all my life. I stay there when I go home. And I thought it was hilarious that there's this sign in front of the store in the town next to mine that said gun store / barbershop.
Did you go in?
I've been in it actually, but it's right next to a new barbecue shop that everyone was really crazy about. And I decided, well, I've known about this my whole life. I'm going to get out and take a picture and like show it to my New York friends, you know, like, so I pulled over, and it's kind of a residential neighborhood with a few little stores. And I took a picture of it. And then I pulled my car over to the side of the road. Then I get back in my car, and then I drive home. It's about 15 minutes back to my grandparents' house. And might have stopped on the way. And I get back to my grandparents' house, and there are police in the driveway. And my grandpa comes running out of the door and is like, "Who's in your car with you? Are you okay?" And then I was like, "I'm fine." He's like, "The car wasn't stolen?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Did you have a black girl in your car at any point during the day?" And I was like, "What?" And I was just like, "No, I didn't have any black friends in the car." The police are there, and they're like, "Well, we had a woman who called and reported a car with this license plate, that there was a black girl driving it, and that she was staking out the barbecue place across the street to rob it."
That's pretty insightful if she got all that from someone driving by.
I'm very obviously white. Like,
no, I know.
I am. And I was like, and my grandpa just kept saying, "Oh," he was telling the police, "Oh, well, she's just been in New York for a long time." And the police were looking at me, and they're like, "Oh yeah." But I was like, I realized what happened is this woman saw me and felt discomfort, but couldn't even think that it might be like punk or queer because she hadn't encountered that before. And she hallucinated that I was black because that's the only
catchphrase, right?
That's the only like frame for that discomfort that she had.
So if she hallucinated that you're black, where did the hallucination that you were gonna, or whoever she was imagining?
Well, then it's
gonna
rob.
Right? Gonna rob.
I'm black. I'm gonna rob a barbecue shop.
Oh, okay, that's what it is.
Oh,
right. Okay, yeah.
So
okay.
if that happened when you were 27, and you grew up with your grandparents most of your life, what the hell must it have been like when you were, say, 12? And how were you finding out about the writers or the music that eventually, became really part of your salvation?
Well, I was raised by my grandparents, my father's parents, primarily, but my biological dad was also a part of my life. In a way, I kind of have four parents, and he's actually like an atheist punk rock musician.
That helps.
It really helps. So he was taking me to like Carbondale and like giving me Laurie Anderson CDs and like taking me to St. Louis to see the Muffs and stuff when I was like 10, 11, 12, 13. Even though I was solidly Southern Baptist until I was about 15. And we argued about that a lot. I always liked punk music. I was like a punk Christian for a moment when I was a tween, which was a really horrible thing to be.
Are there any Christian punk bands you know of?
DC Talk would kind of become whatever was popular at the time. So like in the early 90s, they were like rap and like R&B and like Boys to Men. And then when punk became more popular in the late 90s, they became a pop Christian band. Yeah.
Oh boy.
How would you?
I don't want to know.
How would you find out about authors? And did you start writing when you were very young? I mean, did you start keeping notebooks like so many women?
Yeah, I started writing as soon as I could like read and write. Like when I was like 4 and 5, after I read a story, I was like, well, I want to write a story. Like some kids see a cartoon and they want to draw it. I would read books and then want to write them. So I think I wrote my first like real story that had a beginning, middle, and end in like kindergarten or the first grade. And I just wrote constantly.
Did you get a gold star?
No, my grandma actually was like really worried about me because of it.
She was subject matter.
It included like, I was reading the Bible a lot, like over and over. So I was very strict Southern Baptist. So it included like a lion's pit and like suicide and all kinds of stuff, were you always skeptical about I guess Southern Baptism, or did you have a real divorce at some point? Was there a real hard line? No, I really believed. I was a very strict Southern Baptist. I was a missionary. Like we would go every weekend and like knock on doors and like convert people to Christianity. I had women when I was like 9 years old get down on my knees and like confess to having abortions and like cry in my lap, and I'd lead them to Jesus. I passed out Bibles at school. When I went through puberty though, and I started having sexual dreams about women and not men, and I started to realize I was gay, it got really difficult really fast. Was it painful? When you say difficult, I mean, were you ever suicidal, or was it just like, oh, what do I do? Like where was, that can get pretty heavy. I mean, it can go in many different directions. It is really heavy, and it was insanely difficult. I mean, I fasted on and off for a few months and like prayed to God to give me a sign for a while when I was 12, because I was really questioning my beliefs, and I also couldn't tell if I was sick and there was like something really wrong with me mentally.
Nobody to turn to in a town like that at that age anyway.
No, and then I was sent to an ex-gay camp when I was 15 before I even knew I was gay, which was kind of funny because they're
like that's where you get a lot of action at a place like that. Like, that's where the hookup spot would be.
Yeah, it was. My bunkmate kept telling me, I'm bi, like, do you want to make out every night? And I was just like terrified, like cowering on the edge of the bed. We actually had to sleep in the same bed. They put me alone with a girl in a hotel room at night who was trying to make out with me every night.
Sounds like they're condoning it. Sounds like they're condoning it.
I didn't understand why everyone was talking about homosexuality all the time.
Well, I mean, it's like drug rehab centers. Supposedly you can find a lot of drugs at these places. I mean, it's if you concentrate people with similar minds, similar interests, it seems like maybe more liberating than anything else. But anyhow,
but didn't something like that then just make you go, fuck you, I'm going my own way? I mean, was that part of a balancer and you just deciding everything I've been taught so far is nonsense and I have to be what I am?
Oh yeah, it just took me really falling in love for the first time, and yeah. And when I was 16, I shaved my head, and I had my little stick shift car that I bought with like my grandma's like lawsuit from her death money. And I would drive it to St. Louis every weekend and just stay in St. Louis.
Of course.
Get out of the farm town. And that was nice, and that is how I felt. I felt like, fuck y'all. But that's a lot of the subject matter of my book, Things to Do When You're Goth in the Country. It's a lot about feeling like the other in your hometown, in the place where you're born.
Okay, so you're Bible belting. You're belting the Bible out of belting the Bible out of your mindset. You're fucking off the conversion. You're already into some punk rock. When did you discover? Because where would you even discover in a town that small? I guess going to St. Louis, some of the writers that then began to influence you.
Yeah, when I was like 17, 18, I got involved in the poetry slam scene, which, was what it was in St. Louis. It was really interesting at the time, probably to a New Yorker that would have seemed really banal or something. But that actually just got me hooked up with like a really diverse crew of like poets and artists. And eventually the anarchists started coming to the poetry slams.
Whoa.
And there were this massive group of these queer anarchists who were also blending like art and activism in this interesting way. And they saw that my philosophy was anarcho-Marxism, and they saw that. And I became really involved with their group. I was coming from intense rural poverty. I didn't really have much money. I ended up living in an anarchist collective and moving in with them. And like
in St. Louis?
In St. Louis called CAMP, Community Arts and Media Project. And my rent was like $150 a month, and we all dumpstered our food, and like we, helped build up the place together, like putting in the toilets, tiling, because they had this program where you could buy buildings for like $5.
Oh yeah, I mean St. Louis is
because it was like St. Louis is still falling apart.
Oh, so St. Louis is in the top 50 most dangerous cities on the planet. That's officially not an award, so it can be pretty rough. Yeah.
Yeah, so I got really connected to a really interesting group of like intellectual anarchists who were, combining art and activism in a really cool way. So I lived there for 3 years in an anarchy.
Were you going to school at the time? I mean, did you continue to go to school?
No, I wasn't able to go to college.
I wasn't able to finish high school.
Hey.
Because I wouldn't read their shitty books. I'd already read too much. I knew better.
Really?
Oh yeah.
You were arguing with them?
Oh, my English teacher just said you don't belong here because I wouldn't read Steinbeck after reading the Marquis de Sade and Hubert Selby. So she said, maybe you don't belong here. I said, you're right. Goodbye. And I left.
Really?
Yeah, she was very
nice. What
inspirational to me.
At what age?
15.
Whoa. And then you went out on your own?
Pretty much so. Had shit to do. What can I say?
Yeah, I understand.
So isn't it great when, you didn't go to college, I dropped out of high school, but you are not only winning all these awards, but then you're also teaching at these academic institutions. So what are your writing workshops like because you've been to Sarah Lawrence, Penn State, NYU, Bard, etc. The list goes on. So when you propose your workshop, or what do your workshops involve when you do them?
I do a number of different workshops. They're mostly like short story writing and like really craft-based workshops. One of my favorites that I've taught is called Unsafe Spaces. And I did that a few years ago after I realized that like, I really hate content warnings, especially when it comes to writing. I think they're insane. Like if I say like, this contains gun violence, well, I've already given you the same content that you're going to be getting if you read about it. Close the book and put it down. I also have PTSD and I'm like, that's not how triggers work.
Right.
That's not what a trigger is.
Also, it sounds like people were attacking you just for the title of some of your works before, which is already, it's kind of, I can see why you take the side you're taking. Basically, it's like open it up and judge for yourself.
Shavisa, one of my favorite performances was debating the guy who with Tipper Gore set up record labeling. And when and this was about like Two Live Crew and Judas Priest and all that at the time. And I'm like, if you want to go back to the Bible or Greek, literature, rape, madness, murder did not start with rap music or heavy metal. Let's go back to the origins of why violence exists. And that was one of my favorite performances. And I mean, this whole set, the bizarre thing now is that there are things that are so outrageously uncouth and just beyond the pale, and then there's the new Puritanism. So we have both sides of this dilemma interacting at the same time.
Yeah, and the new Puritanism is infecting the left in a way that I never expected, honestly. And you're right, Tipper Gore was the first one to, or in my lifetime, to put content warnings all over. I remember on the CDs, that big label, content warning, and now the left wants us to do that with our writing. Like, no fucking way.
I don't even consider them the left, though. And I think a lot of them are basically closeted right, that are basically, they hate their parents or they hate something, and they want to be so dogmatic about something that is basically rooted in intolerance often.
I'm not going to write them off quite that way. I know a lot of young queers who find this really important. And I do know, I think that younger people have more of a voice now than I did when I was their age. And they're also more afraid of being canceled. So a lot of them are parroting what they've heard other people say because they don't want to be in trouble and they want to do the right thing and they want to do well.
Good point.
And when I have sat with them in my workshops and had these conversations with them where there's a give and take and it's a private thing and it's not in the coliseum that is social media, it's allowed them to, like, they change their minds, they open up. Sometimes they argue with me, sometimes they change my minds about things, but there is more of an ability for the young people to actually listen to an older person, be like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And it is starting to make me wonder, like, are we not talking to them the way that older people talked to us when we were young? And are we just yelling at them on social media now, which doesn't actually change anyone's mind?
Correct. Yeah. Good point.
I think the difference too in my generation, real weirdos from the word go, and glam helped establish that, is we didn't give a shit about being liked. We didn't care if you liked what we said. We were going to do what we wanted to do. I still don't give a shit about being liked. I just don't care. And I think so much of that, wanting to be liked, wanting to be in with an opinion that other people share is just so devastatingly anti-individual. And it's just, it's an
assimilationist. It's an assimilationist theology. They're more assimilationist.
Yeah. It's to me, it's just anathema to what I stand for.
But also it comes down to, what's the obsession? Is it the solution or the problem? And being productive and being obsessed with the solution requires more than just the stamping a scarlet letter on people and then just self-cannibalizing and racing in this kind of who's going to win the race of purity. I actually have a question. So here you are giving lectures and workshops and all these schools, and maybe I missed it when you said they didn't allow you into school. Was this a financial thing, or you got rejected from the schools you applied for, or what happened?
I got into college on an opera scholarship, actually.
Wait, on what?
An opera scholarship. I was
in Jex Blackmore, the last podcast. Keckler, what are you opera freaks? My horizons are expanding all the time.
My grandma really, my dad's a singer, my grandpa's a singer. Like, singing is in our family. My uncle's a singer and drummer. He actually was a drummer for Big Fun for a while. There's like a punk rock streak in our in our family that's been in the same tiny town for like generation after generation. There's like moonshiners and rockers,
Which school did you get into for opera?
So I got just a small scholarship for opera. My grandma like spent a lot of her money and time like making sure that like I was able to participate in theater and music when I was young. And that was expensive for them. We did not have a lot of money. My grandpa probably like kept a family of 3 on like $20,000 a year or less, like my whole life, you know? So they put a lot of money into me and they sacrificed a lot to get me that stuff. I had private opera training from a private teacher who lived in a town over from me, who had gone to New York and graduated from Juilliard and then came back to Centralia, Illinois and kept teaching. So she was like 80 when she was teaching me, you know, Miss Malin.
How old were you when she's teaching you?
She started teaching. Well, I started opera with a different teacher when I was 5, and then she started training me when I was 8.
What made you decide at 5, like, if all of the arts, the most difficult will perhaps be opera? How do you even know you have that in you?
When you're singing and you can hit all of the notes that other kids can't hit and you can sing louder than I'm a dramatic soprano, or I was. So they were just like, well, you got to put her in here. And so, yeah, I took opera training. I got a small scholarship for opera that paid for 1 semester of school. Yeah, so I was able to afford 1 semester of school, but it kind of fell apart after that. And as far as school went.
What's interesting is the schools that you, not all of them,
but Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, SIUE, state school.
Okay. Yeah. Well, a lot of the schools, it seems like you, at least what I've read, that you work at, or you're a guest lecturer or workshop worker at, these schools are extraordinarily expensive. I mean, they are over the top. I mean, no, really. I mean, if you,
I literally, I couldn't afford a state school.
Yeah. And then you're in.
I think I still owe them money.
If you go to a lot of these schools,
$1,000 from parking tickets or something.
Well, these days you can be like $250,000 in debt, and you're basically an indentured servant for the rest of your life. Do you ever address that? I mean, obviously you're getting a little money from them, so you don't want to necessarily broach that. But
I have addressed it repeatedly in any of these places. Like, how much is it for 1 year of tuition? Are you fucking nuts?
It's really strange. I mean, capitalism, like the fact that we live in capitalism kind of forces us to constantly take part in things that are against our beliefs, right? Like,
well, I recently I've been disagreeing that we are living in capitalism. These are basically, you know, the books are fixed here. They're cooked books. I mean, if you're a real capitalist, the amount of collateral damage for, if you're an industrialist, whether it's pollution, all that stuff, they're actually in the red the whole time. And then the people actually have to bail them out. They're actually not really profiting based on what's really happening.
That's a good point. It's socialism for the rich and free market capitalism for everybody else.
Yeah, pretty much. So was it a heartbreak? Also, like, okay, maybe I'm not following opera. And the next follow-up question, 2-part question. When you moved to New York, suddenly you're in the city where you have the Metropolitan Opera, you have City Opera. Did you ever indulge and see any giant productions?
Oh, I would go to the opera all the time. So that's, yeah, I stopped opera around, like, I stopped singing or opera around 18, 19. And I just was like, I decided I had to pick one thing, because I was in Shakespearean acting. I was writing books. I was doing poetry slam. I was singing and, you know, doing competitions. And I was like, I have to pick one thing, right? I kind of did. And I picked writing. And that brought me to New York City when I was 21. And, you know, I say I didn't go to college, but what I did do was I moved in with retired Professor Steve Cannon. And he was a blind, retired professor, novelist, poet, playwright who ran this organization called A Gathering of the Tribes. And I lived with him in A Gathering of the Tribes while working in trade for like a free place to live in the Lower East Side for 2 years. And I was also his like personal assistant in his eyes because he was blind.
When did that start?
2003. And he would give me, so it's a small press, a magazine, a performance space. And he lives in the gallery, is also his home. So I would wake up every morning and like read him the entire New York Times, feed him, and then go work in the office as his personal assistant for like everything Tribes related. And that also meant like at night, he would be like, what are you working on? Read it to me. So I had this professor who had a PhD like in world history from the London School of Economics and was like a very accomplished author reading my work and mentoring me. And then he hooked me up with John Ferris and he hooked me up with Danny Schott. And,
can we just pause for 1 second and say how freaking amazing that is? Because what we were just saying before we were recording again is it is so important for someone to read their stuff or to hear it or to read it to somebody, because when you're writing, it's such an onanistic sport that, you know, if you have a cat, they usually have to hear everything. But
Yeah. And
it's so important to read it out.
Yeah, he would listen and he would just really edit my work and critique it. And sometimes he would say, just throw that away. It's not working. Like, he was kind of harsh with me, which I appreciate. He also told me, he was really old school. So he still, even though it was the 2000s, he still was like, you can do things like it's the 70s. He's like, you can audit writing classes at the new school. You don't need to pay anything if you're not getting credit for it. That's their system. Rebecca Wolf, who is like the editor of Fence, actually let me audit some of her writing classes at the new school. Zora Litsky did. I mean, a lot of people let me do a lot of things that were really not normal because I was connected to Steve. Sometimes like Ishmael Reed or like Willie Perdomo or Anne Waldman would come in and he'd make me give them a poem and they'd tell me if they liked it or not.
Wow.
Did you ever teach? Did you teach at Naropa?
No, I never did.
I did for one semester, but I mean, Anne Waldman is still pretty fierce.
But you win. You really win because if you spent or one spent say $200,000 to get a degree in English or literature, what does that get you besides the debt?
Debt.
I mean, if you might get an education, but you got an education, and
Bob Holman and Norman Douglas. Steve did this amazing thing. He told Bob Holman, who owned the Bowery Poetry Club, who was a friend of his. Well, first he took me around to all of the poetry places in New York that he thought I was interested in.
One moment for Bob Holman, because he's done an incredible amount of work for poetry in New York for many, many decades. Right.
And he told me to pick one place that I wanted to go to. He said, you have to find your community. You have to go to readings regularly. And I was like, I finally, after seeing all of them, I really liked the Bowery Poetry Club. It was very avant-garde and weird, and it was fun. And Jennifer Blowdryer was there, and the O'Deborah twins were there. And I was 21, and I said the Bowery Poetry Club. So the first year I was in New York, he told Bob to send him, Steve Cannon, my tab at the end of the year, and I could go to any shows I wanted at the Bowery Poetry Club for free, to any readings, and open bar for me.
As it should be.
And that was my 2-year-long, I didn't go to college, but I had this really intensive writing residency through the community of Lower East Side writers and New York writers that I think is just as good as any college experience.
What year were you situated almost as often as possible in the Bowery Poetry Club? What years were those?
That was 2003 to 2005.
Okay, so that was the origins of when you were now ensconced helping Steve Cannon, and first learning not only the trade of your own writing and performing, but also what you went on to do, which is to start raising grants and being more of, as you are now, the executive director.
And Steve did send me to nonprofit management and grant writing classes at NYU when I was 24, starting then. And I went on and off for a few years. And I kind of balked at that because I was like, this isn't art, because I was a kid. But he paid for the classes. And now, I'm really glad that he did, because now after working for Tribes for 20 years, and Steve passed away in 2019, I am the executive director of a gathering of the tribes.
And, the thing is that there is a really big divide. And that's why, I also have to look and phrase someone with your background, as opposed to, I haven't applied for grants. But I love when other people do, because I do feel that poetry, writing, musicians should have access to money and should not be in debt by going to universities. So anybody that has that skill, it's so valuable, for whatever. It's just so important, because there is a lot of money out there. Just most of us don't know how to access it. We just don't know.
That's true. And that's part of what Tribes does. I try to get every writer paid for the readings, for the work we publish as often as possible. And that's what Steve did. Tribes specifically exists to provide resources and a platform to traditionally underrepresented artists. And that includes artists of color, immigrants, Indigenous artists, women artists, and also artists from poor and working class backgrounds. And I think a lot of the new identity politics doesn't include class, and that is a major gap in the conversation today. Tribes was founded by a Marxist. Steve Cannon named his only son Karl Marx. There is no doubt that he was a Marxist. And we do believe that art is work and that artists deserve to be paid for art. And that is one of the things Steve did for me, like a kid from a small farm town coming from rural poverty. He gave me a chance to be an artist in New York City. So
absolutely. And, I just, for a very short period in LA, a couple of times, I did a workshop for homeless kids. And the thing is, I said, anybody can have a pencil and a pen because these stories are valuable. Even if nobody's going to see them or you're not going to read them, you have to write them down. You have to write them down as part of your own exorcism, because you might not have a chance to even say it out loud, when I think is, of course, the best form of exorcism, because when you are talking about, as we do, classism, sexism, war, poverty, etc., all the big issues, we become the mouth for other people that have mouths but don't know how to scream as loudly as we do.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I left Southern Illinois, I had to leave partly because I was gay. But when I got out to New York, I realized not a lot of people are writing about the people who I'm writing about. My mother and both of my brothers have been struggling with homelessness most of their lives. And I am right now, you know, I write about that experience. And a lot of my work, especially the work that I'm working on right now, is trying to counteract that narrative that we see in this culture that, like, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Or that claims that $15 an hour is a success when it's not even, it's still slave labor wages, when like they make a big deal about $15 an hour.
Also 27th in the world in upper mobility, even though we actually technically invented modern upper mobility, but it's a big lie. There's 26 other places that you can live. If you put effort into it, you're going to see better results.
And part of the reason is university debt, medical debt, and just the lack of wages or opportunities.
The list goes on. Well, you know, what's also interesting, because you're talking about you want to represent homelessness and all that stuff. And what Lydia was saying about, you know, anyone can get a pen, a paper, a pencil, and just write things down. One thing I would imagine that you are expressing to people when you're giving lectures and all that stuff. I think for a lot of people, if they come from poverty, it's not just writing things down, expressing themselves, is visualizing success and being able to realize it. That's like one of the biggest steps and the hardest steps for so many people. And when we had Wayne Kramer on here, and he volunteers in the prison systems in California, he would have these like kind of little song seminars and get people to write songs together. And he says, you know, none of them are really going to go out there and be professional musicians, but just to see their vision realized is just, it's beyond even what they want to express. And this is the lessons from that alone are just monstrous. I remember reading this article, and I forget who it was, of this guy who's super intelligent, test scores through the roof, but inner city black man who ended up going to Phillips Andover, the same New England prep school that the Bushes went to, old WASP boarding school. And what blew his mind wasn't, oh, are these people smarter than me? It was seeing people just expressing, hey, everything's just going to work out for me. I never, you know, of course it's going to work out for me. How would it not?
Tim, I have to take it one step further. Seen in modern politics now, which has never been more apparent, the arrogance of people that are supposedly really well educated, acting as stupid as they fucking have been for the past X amount of years. This is, to me, what's absolutely astonishing. Absolutely.
So outrageous. I'm going to form this in a question, going back and trying to making a little full circle about going to these schools that cost so much money.
Don't do it.
You're obviously dealing with a lot of students who actually probably come from some money. Do you ever have anyone come to you and saying, thank you, you know, I came from nothing and you're a role model? Or, I mean, how often do you come across people coming from real poverty who are going to these institutions?
My work is taught at like Evergreen and Sarah Lawrence, and those are like big, expensive schools, but it's also being taught at some community colleges. And I have actually had several community college instructors reach out to me and say they love teaching things to do near Goth in the country, because a lot of their students there, a lot of them are like young mothers who are going to, you know, get their degree just like for nursing or get an associate's, or, you know, and they say that those people often say, this is the first time I've read a book about me that has characters that I recognize and that I can identify with. And I didn't know that people like me could write books. And I think that is, that's not everything that I'm trying to do, but that is one thing that.
Well, that must touch you. I mean, that's pretty powerful.
It definitely is. It definitely is.
It's just important to express to people that their pain is valid. And there are ways that are, I mean, art is the universal self, is the self to the universal wound.
And even if you're not going to be an artist, like to be an artist full-time or professionally, everyone is.
Now that's poverty. Now that's
everyone
poverty.
Is not artist, you know, everyone. Yeah, that's also poverty. But I think that the arts in schools, like, I mean, I know it sounds really corny to say, but it is good for people. Like, I also played the trombone in high school, and like that.
Oh, wait a minute.
I
love a woman with a frickin' trombone. The only thing I like more is a woman with a tuba. Don't even tell me you're dating somebody with a tuba. We're going to talk about this more later. I think too that, you know, people need to understand that to be an artist, in other words, mostly dedicating yourself to a life of poverty, is not as important as to live your life creatively.
Yes.
To live your life creatively and to see, you know, how much beauty and creation already exist out there, because we are inundated with so much bad news and so much devastation that to live your life creatively doesn't mean you have to constantly produce things. It means you have to see also what exists out there that has already been created. And I don't even mean in a book, on a record, or in a movie, in general.
And to a point he brought up earlier, like also that ability to imagine another way of living. Art can inspire that. And like when you play an instrument and you get better every year, you learn that like if you dedicate yourself to something, there's a way out. There's a way to change, to actually improve your skills.
Well, also what I like to tell to most of the geniuses I know, which is think of who your heroes were, geniuses themselves, who lived probably a life of incredible poverty and without much recognition, even post-mortem. You're in a good club.
Have you ever brought your trombone to a lecture or a poetry slam? So like whenever you wanted to cut someone off, you're like,
I brought it to a few protests.
Oh, well, that will work. That will work.
Marched with it in the street, like for some protest.
Hey, Tim, do you remember that protest I staged against a poet when we were performing in Joshua Tree with John Tottenham? I didn't even need a trombone. I just used my built-in trumpet.
Well, that was more like a sousaphone, and it was like.
Time is up.
Digressing a little bit, what were some of the greatest opera production experiences you witnessed while in New York? I mean, Levine. I mean, although he got Me Too'd, and I think he won for defamation, but I mean, he was a real genius. I mean, I'd go check him do his thing at the Met, and I saw some pretty insane productions for sure.
Yeah, we used to do the $20 like lottery ticket thing to the Met and stand in the back for the first half, and then all of the people who paid would leave, and then you could sit
right.
the second half.
Yeah, you know, I saw Schoenberg's Moses und Aaron there, which is like this serial, 200 chorus, atonal. I can't believe how they did it. Perfectly in tune, atonal serial music, and that was already something like when it was performed, something like 60 years old, and pretty much 3/4 of the audience left like, what is this? And and I definitely got better seats.
Don't ask me why, but as I sit here manspreading, I just have to get back to the trombone for a minute.
Oh yeah, you mean the sack butt? That's the original name of the trombone, the sack butt.
Ooh, well,
that's what it was originally called.
Timothy, watch your mouth. I just love the trombone. As a matter of fact, I think I was asking Layla the other night, Tim, if she knew any female trombone. I don't even know why I asked this, but now I know one. So
I do.
Still pick up the trombone ever?
Oh, I
protest.
I still have it and I still do it sometimes, but I am not good at it anymore. I don't think I was ever really good at it until my senior year. And suddenly for a year I could play the trombone. And then after that, I didn't play it anymore.
It is one of the more audacious instruments.
Well, I just love glissandi, and any instrument that can do a glissando, I'm kind of like sold.
I think I learned it because every other instrument, I did actually try to play the baritone for a minute, Lydia, like when I was in the 4th grade. But every other instrument I ever tried to play, my dad could play because he can play every instrument. So if it had valves, he would start correcting me. If it had strings, if it was a piano, which I also tried to play, he'd start correcting me and like teaching me. And he could be really overbearing about it.
It's like, hey, I don't want to
use a slide instrument. Dad, so I was I'm learning.
I don't want to use your lips, Dad. Get out of here.
He didn't know a slide. So I finally was like,
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, my dad didn't know how to play the slide guitar either. So I guess I won that one too. Well, there you go.
So
did you have that experience too?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
Baritone horn, not baritone sax, correct?
Baritone horn. Yeah, it's kind of like a tuba. So she was saying. I was like,
is that the same as a euphonium? Oh, gosh, I'm a musician.
It's a big one that You don't quite wear it. It's a little smaller than a tuba.
No, it is a euphonium. That's the other name. I'm
Tim,
correct.
Tim, may I just say my birthday is coming in a few months, and a mini tuba would not go amiss.
Well, a euphonium is a mini tuba. But I'm telling you, sousaphone, I see it on you. I mean,
Tim, you're a professional musician. I'm willing to take lessons. It will never go anywhere.
Well, I mean, part tuba, part necklace. I mean, it's kind of an interesting piece, you know. I mean, that's how I look at it.
You play, Lydia? What wind instruments do you play? If any?
I'm about to start the mini tuba.
Oh yeah.
Look,
she's got her own pipes. She got her own pipes. They're pretty strong.
Shavisa, I'm not going into what I do with my mouth in my spare time, and I'm not going to ask you what you do with yours either, because we can only leave something to the imagination of the listener. Right. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
I'll blow you if you blow me.
I don't know if you came prepared, but do you have any excerpts you would want to read us?
Sure. I have a few books. I have my book, let's see, I have two of my books here.
And let me just say, this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Chavisa Woods. And I can't wait. So what are we hearing a little excursion into now?
Let's see. I'm going to read from Things to Do When You're Goth in the Country. Yeah, I'm going to read the end of this book about, since we were talking so much about rural poverty, this was loosely based on a boy I went to school with. And, it is fictionalized somewhat. It's a little bit of an amalgamation of a few boys that I went to high school with. This story is called What's Happening on the News. And it starts off, with two kids who want to go into the arts in the third grade, and then follows them to graduation. And the narrator is a girl who really wants to at first be a Christian actress when she's in the third grade. And one of her best friends is a boy who wants to be a film director named Tyson. And then
progressive third graders. All right, just
well,
get into it.
He wanted to direct films, and I did actually want to be a Christian actress when I was in the third grade.
Wow.
What
is a Christian?
I mean, by the time I was in the third grade, I believe already kind of.
I could read about what a Christian actress is instead. That's in the story.
Kind of a Satanist. I think I was a Satanist by the third grade.
Yeah. So this then senior year, 9/11 occurs, and then we go into 9/11. So this excerpt is the end of this story, what's happening on the news just after 9/11 has occurred. Just months before high school graduation, Tyson signed up for the Army along with one other boy in our class and two from the class below. The average class size in my school was about 20 kids per grade. Each year, at least 2 kids joined the military. That means 10% of the students every year left high school from my town to join the military. They signed up at lunchtime. Twice a week, every year, during the last few months of school, the Army set up an information and recruitment booth in our lunchroom. One after another, year after year, the boys would turn 18 and start eyeing that booth over their ham and cheese sandwiches like it was a girl they were afraid to get fucked by. Then finally, one day, one of them would have too much Coca-Cola, and he'd swagger over to the corner of the lunchroom and sign up for a private appointment at the recruiting station in the next town over. The next morning, he'd come in and announce proudly, puffing his chest, "I'm in the Army now, and I'm getting out of here, fuckers." I think that's what they thought, that they were getting out of this podunk town, going to see something beautiful, going to see the real world. Even if they were just there to bomb the real world, at least they'd get to see it first. Something that wasn't cornfields and Walmart and bent over grandparents heading to factories and teen moms trying harder than anyone could bear to look at long, and church potlucks, drunken bonfires and strip mall parking lots and all that. They wanted to see something spectacular. Everyone wants to live a spectacular life. Live something anyone would ever want to make a film about. Who would want to make a movie about bent over grandparents still struggling to pay electric bills after 60 years of working, just struggling to pay electric bills? They probably thought bombing the real world, like the one they saw in movies, would save them from that fate too. They didn't have access to the kind of story lives where people walk around great cities, falling in love at museums, or become rich spy thieves and go on high-speed car chases, only to discover the meaning of life was hidden in a jewel behind a secret door right where they started. Or the kind of movie story lives where people get rich, starting an exciting but quirky business, or make academic dialogue over complex personal entanglements. Hell, they didn't even have access to living a college road trip film. But they did have access to Marlon Brando. They had access to This Beach is Safe to Surf and to tanks rolling over a moral dilemma, where either way, whatever they decide, they are the hero, shooting or not shooting the shivering man, the slant-eyed man, shooting up the family, cowering behind torn couches, and searching for the armed men hiding in the closet, trudging through the desert, hurt locker, jar head, pounding your girlfriend against the wall, legs spread, on leave, for God, for country, for fuck's sake. What's the other option? Either way, pull the trigger or not, they are finally the hero because they just had to do it or couldn't bring themselves to. Everyone feels compassion. There's so much weighing on their dumb, brave heads. I remember the day Tyson made the decision. We were sitting on the bleachers in the gymnasium. The gym was empty. They'd begun hanging the decorations for graduation. There were sequin trestles lining the basketball hoop. We were 18, and this was the most adult conversation we would ever have. He told me he was going to do it. He was going to sign up. I asked about his life's dream, the one he was just ditching. He told me that it had all been a childish dream. He told me he had no experience with film. He told me, you could really be an actor. You've been acting in the community's theater since you were a kid. You have real experience to put on your resume. This, of course, was ridiculous. My starring roles had namely been Gossip Lady #2 in The Sound of Music and a very lesbianic Peter Pan in a children's musical version of Peter Pan. My rural community theater experience couldn't make for an acting resume that would give me credit in a real city, even accounting for the elite Hollywood gay mafia. Maybe that's your path. With everything that's happened in this country, though, I got to step up and take responsibility. I have to defend your freedom to follow your dreams. Maybe that's my path, to make this world safe for the people who grow up and do the things I always wanted to do. When people start to talk in words you've heard before, it's easy to know who's writing the script. I'd seen words like those on pamphlets and heard the meaning of them in my own speech as a child. I heard these words on the real news, the Christian news, and from the mouths of young military recruiters who stood in the corner of the lunchroom below helicopter explosion posters, trying not to look like they were checking out high school girls. And now it was coming from Tyson, the aspiring, serious yet entertaining Italian film director. And I realized what I always should have known when I looked at the certainty and the question battling in Tyson's wide baby blue eyes and his dimples showing, even when there was no glimmer of a smile on his face, with the impossibly clear, smooth skin and his wavy black hair ending in little curlicues on his forehead. He wasn't a director at all. He was the leading man. He was the one everyone was rooting for. And it was a gangster Christian film he was starring in after all. The movie opened up before me. I could see all the scenes. Tyson in Iraq pressing buttons and buildings miraculously exploding hundreds of miles away. Tyson standing in a uniform in Baghdad, machine gun armed, passing day after day just watching out. Tyson running in combat boots, the sand scattering in clouds behind him. He went to Iraq and then he wrote home, sending a letter addressed to all of his friends that Emily transcribed and emailed. He told us how he guarded a building in Baghdad when the military had taken over. He made friends with the local kids. He taught them about America. He talked to the Iraqi children about Jesus and about owning cars and houses and playing video games. He taught the Iraqi children how to say the word tits. He taught them what it meant. They thought it was awful. He thought it was hilarious. This movie he starred in, it had side characters as well. Their stories would not end in triumph like the one of the leading man. A year into his service, another boy from our town who served with Tyson was sent home on permanent leave for mental instability. He got a job delivering pizza in the next town over. He was fired after 6 months for repeatedly telling customers gory details about the war, how his job in Iraq was to shoot his friends in the ankles during house raids. This was his job because he never froze during the raids. He was always proud of that. Many of his fellow soldiers just froze during crossfire, stood staring dumbly into the oncoming blaze. So his job was to notice when this happened and then shoot his friends in the ankles so they would fall down and not get shot in the head and killed during crossfire when they froze, which he never did, which he was always very proud of. A boy from the class above me who became a military medic was dishonorably discharged for servicing a severely wounded Iraqi civilian before servicing a mildly wounded US soldier during one of these raids. He would come home to the town he had grown up in and live in a house he purchased before leaving Iraq. Within a month, his wife would leave him for another man, the one she started seeing while he was in Iraq. He would start getting drunk at local bars and telling people the story of his dishonorable discharge over and over. 5 years after losing his home to foreclosure, he swallowed a handful of pills and was simply gone. Tyson got shot in the leg and returned with a Purple Heart, the leading man in his American gangster Christian film. He returned a war hero. The town put a sign up for him in front of the high school, welcoming him home, naming him a hero. He was famous in the town. He got loans, he bought a nice house and married Emily. He took over ownership of his family's grocery store. He had 3 children. They were baptized in the Catholic Church. He bought a jet ski. He stayed fit, except for a beer belly that formed in his mid-30s. In his mid-30s, the war was still going in a crusade against the ever-expanding enemy. Victory had been declared numerous times, and he thought it was a victory in a way, for himself at least. His house was 2 stories tall with a swimming pool and game room and new shiny cars always in the driveway. He was the local hero. He rode at the head of the military float in the town's bicentennial parade. He stood next to the mayor when the ribbon was cut in front of the new library, and once a year, he visited the 4th grade class in the school he'd attended as a child. He brought in his Purple Heart. He brought in the bullet shell that had been embedded in his leg. The class passed it around from one to another and awed. It was a miraculous token of war heroism manifested before them from overseas, from a place that seemed so far away and sometimes even on the news.
Thank you.
Well, and these are the stories that need to be told, because especially, the fallacy of going into impoverished areas, especially schools, high schools, to solicit men into war, some and women, and some who will come back permanently damaged, physically, emotionally, mentally, PTSD. Others that no big deal, but who knows what they're going to do next. And to even validate the fact that war is still valid, which is the American way of life, which is what this country was founded on, is still a base problem as we go into the end of February 2022, with possible invasions right around the fucking corner. The war is never over. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Chavisa Woods.
Thank you for doing this.
We will talk more further and very soon.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, you guys.
Oh, it's awesome.